Well, Coach, great having you on. We go back a long way. And of course, you were a great player at Duke and had an opportunity probably to make one of the most famous shots in Duke basketball. I was seeing that's one of the top all-time shots. But, I wanted to ask you the question here. You went to Duke. Jason went to North Carolina. What were your thoughts about those North Carolina guys when you were playing for Duke?
Well, it's interesting. When I was a player at Duke, a couple of really good friends of mine were players at North Carolina. Myself, Jerry Stackhouse, and Jeff McGinnis, we all played AAU together. We were on the same team there in North Carolina. And then Rasheed Wallace, who was another freshman, we were all part of the class of '93. So we were in camps together, all-star games together and things like that. And so although the rivalry is very, very bitter, there was a friendship that you had with those guys. And then when I got to school, when I got to college, you hear about it all the time, but when you're actually there, the proximity of the two schools. So when I was in school, there was one mall. The mall was literally right in the middle between Duke and Carolina. So you'd see each other, whether it's at the mall, whether it's at the barbershop, some of the same restaurants, different parties. And so there was a mutual respect, I think, that we had for each other. And I think, what happened is that I think that especially the fans have a hatred for each other, but the players, I think there's a mutual respect, because I think both programs and the players from each program and the coaches, I think they understand how much each program needs each other. Each program pushes each other to be its best.
Well, I think probably one of the things you just mentioned, I think, I guess when, Coach K and, Coach Smith probably really respected one another, and there wasn't any of that. Of some places, that's not the case. I guess that probably, really helped that connection that you had with those guys that played at Carolina.
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting because when I was in school, my first year was '93, and Duke had just won back-to-back championships in '91, '92. Carolina won the national championship in '93. And so that's what I mean. Like, you had Carolina that was historically under Coach Smith, and it's one of the best programs ever. And then, Coach K comes in there in 1980, and he's having to fight that. He's having to fight North Carolina. He's having to fight NC State with Coach Valvano. And then he builds this program at this small private school with only 6,000 students against these two state schools. And he builds it into something incredible. And so the rivalry really intensified in the late '80s, as Duke started to become really good. By the time I got there, like the first time we played North Carolina, my freshman year, we were ranked #1 in the country. They were ranked #2. And so those games were just always super intense, but there was always a mutual respect. And one of the things that was fascinating to me as I got older, you become an adult, is to watch the relationship with Coach K and Coach Smith change. Like, there was always mutual respect. To be honest with you, I don't know if there was much like if they actually liked each other, but there was a respect there. But I think that relationship changed when Coach Smith retired, and then basically Coach K became Coach Smith. Mm-hmm. And I think as that happened, he became the guy that the new coaches in the league were going after, the younger coaches were going after. He became the guy that sort of had the crown. And I think his level of understanding of all the things that Coach Smith had to deal with grew to a very higher level. And that respect that was always there just reached another level. And I think that's when they actually became friends, during that time when Coach Smith retired and Coach K had a better understanding of all the things that Coach Smith was dealing with.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Well, let me ask you a question about you and your career. Clearly you scored a bunch of points, 1,601 points. That's a lot of points. Now, I probably took a few shots to get that many. But, I was just wondering, you were a point guard. Do you think point guards make the best coaches?
I don't necessarily think that. I don't necessarily think that. I think I don't think it hurts. But I'm not one of these guys that think you have to play the game or have had to have played the game in order to be a really good coach. I think there's some really outstanding coaches that were maybe managers, maybe were walk-on, were part of it, that understood it and saw it, for a different level. But certainly being a point guard and being a point guard for Duke, being a point guard for Coach K, which is the position that he played under Coach Knight, there's a high level of responsibility that comes with that. I'll tell you maybe where it helped me the most was when you guys hired me at VCU. I was so young, I didn't really have any experience, but I did have the experience of being Coach K's point guard. And so I understood the responsibility and the things, that as far as leadership and things like that. I was the first junior point guard for Coach K. I'm sorry, the first junior captain for Coach K during my time there. And so I did learn a lot about leadership by being his point guard.
Well, I want to ask you this question. So back, you're 27 years old, and I think you're sitting there in study hall one night about 6 o'clock. And I said, hey, Jeff, can you come down to my office for a minute? And you come down and I said, hey, Jeff, you think you could be the next head coach at VCU? I always wondered what ran through your head when I said that.
Doc, to be honest with you, man, for like the next 2-3 minutes, I'm not really sure what you said, because the only thing that was going through my mind at that time, I kind of blacked out when you said, hey, look, Coach Mack is going to resign at the end of the year. We met yesterday and he's going to resign. After that, I'm not sure I heard anything you said, because in my mind, all I'm thinking about is, man, I have to go to this Final Four again and pass out these damn resumes. It's like, where am I going to work? Like, I have to go through this again, what I just went through, go to these AAU events with a stack full of resumes and hope a coach will listen to me and want to hire me. And when you said that about, we think that it's you, we think you're the guy, that can do this. You told me, I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. You said, we've watched you this year, I've watched you, and we really believe, I really believe that you're the guy. And I remember, thinking, and you said to me, like, what do you think about that? And my response was, look, like, I know I've never done it. I know I've only been coaching for 2 years, but I believe that the two qualities that really good coaches have, they're guys, they can get their guys to believe in them and to want to fight for them. And I do believe in my ability to do that. Now, when I left you and I remember I called my dad and I told him, and he did not believe me. Like, I told him the conversation we just had, he didn't believe me. And I kept trying to tell him. And then finally I was like, man, do you think I'm ready? And he was like, well, you better be. And then I called Kanika. We were just dating then. We weren't even engaged. And, I said, like, hey, I need to talk to you about something really serious. And so I went to her apartment. She was, clerking for a judge there. And I started telling her about the conversation that we just had. She didn't believe me. She did not believe me. And I kept trying to get her. And so as I'm talking to her, telling her, trying to get her to believe me, Coach K called me. And so I answered it, but I answered it on speaker. And I was like, Coach, what's up? And he was like, man, can you believe this? Like, can you believe what's happening? Like, your AD just called me. And as he's saying this, Kanika's looking at me like, holy, you know what? You're telling the truth. So that's kind of how it all happened in that situation.
Yeah, that was really neat. I laugh about it too, because I remember we had the press conference, and saying you're going to be our guy, and, pretty excited. I'll never forget, President Trani gets up there and says, well, I just want everybody to know this was Dr. Sanders,
Yep.
when I mean to hire Jeff. And then the amazing thing, when we win the conference championship, go to the NCAA, who's down there?
It was him.
The president,
No question. It's really interesting, and I think about this a lot. And I actually talk to young coaches about this, like especially guys that have just gotten a job for the first time. And this is a lesson that I had to learn on the fly. But, you can't really pay it. You shouldn't. You have to do your best to not pay attention to what anyone else is saying, what anyone else is thinking. Certainly at 27, I had, landed one of I thought the best job in that league. I thought that when I worked with my dad at Old Dominion. My dad actually used to say that a lot, that he thought the VCU job was the best job in the league. And, there was a lot of criticism that you got, that I got, and things like that. And one of the things that I always appreciate was that knowing that you and the university, but especially you, had my back. I remember shortly after, it was maybe it was probably in June, that we got some stuff in the paper, about me falsifying, like an accusation of me saying something on my resume that wasn't true. And it was certainly true. And one of the things I'll never forget is that you wrote a letter to the editor about it, and they published it in the paper, and you had my back. And that's where I really, there's no way that we could have done what we were able to do there without each other, and without having each other's back. And it's one of the first things that I learned about being a head coach, is that there has to be a partnership, with the athletic director, and we certainly had that.
Yeah, that's for sure. We're kind of tied at the hip, or
Yep.
at the hip, and I never quite understand why, some ADs and coaches don't have that kind of relationship. But, it's a two-way street, like you said. It's this trust. I think as we move forward, I trusted you, you trusted me to be honest with each other and help each other out. So that was cool. But you clearly had two great mentors in your life. Your dad was a terrific coach, wonderful man. I got to know over the years, and just always loved him so much. And then, of course, coaching with Coach K. So if you had to take one thing from what you learned from your dad, just one from the coaching standpoint, one thing from Coach K, what would each one of those be?
Well, I would say, it's actually really interesting, and I felt like those guys, my father and Coach, were so similar. It's one of the reasons why I chose Duke, because Coach K reminded me so much of my dad. And so I would think, I think the thing that I learned from each of them is, like, you have to fight. Like, nothing's going to be given to you. You have to earn everything. You have to show up every day, and you have to fight. When I look at my father's career, he started as a JV high school coach, a volunteer JV high school coach, and then he became the head coach there. Then he started as the restricted earnings guy in college, where he made about $12,000 at Wake Forest. Then he was a Division II head coach, a Division I head coach. He was a head coach in the NBA developmental league. The G League now is what it's called. And then he was an assistant in the NBA. But in all those things, he had to show up and he had to fight. He had to prove. And when you look at what Coach K was able to do at Duke, like I mentioned earlier, this small private school with these two monster, huge tradition state schools, one 8 miles apart, one about 20 miles away. And he had to fight every day. He had to show up every day and prove. And so I think that's probably the lesson that I learned from each of them. You have to show up every day, you have to fight, and you have to earn, whatever it is that you get.
You were a great player, like I said, at Duke. And then, when you finished school, I guess you played in France for a while, and then, played in the CBA. Is that right?
Yes.
And when did you really know your real passion in your career was coaching?
It's interesting, because when I was in college, that's like the last thing I thought about. Like I would always tell I don't want to coach. I don't want to do this. I see how hard it is. You seem miserable most of the time. But I knew that he loved it. I knew he had a passion for it, but I just knew that, how difficult it was. And so what happened with me was that I was getting ready for the pre-draft camp after my senior year of college, and I had an injury. I ruptured a disc in my back. And so I didn't, get drafted. I didn't get a chance to go to summer league and do anything recovering from my back injury. And when I came back and I started playing, I played my first year. I played in the CBA in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And it was during that season, Doc, it was right around Christmas. My dad had a break. He was the head coach at Old Dominion. And he came out and spent a few days with me to see me play. And we were talking, and he asked me, like, hey, if this doesn't work out, what do you want to do? And I remember I said to him then, well, I don't know. I've never really thought about it. My dream, like everyone, was to be an NBA player and play professionally. And to be honest with you, my dream job was always, after playing, was to be an NBA general manager. That was kind of like, if I could script it exactly the way that I wanted it, that's what I would have done. And I said, but I think maybe coaching. And he was like, yeah, you don't want to do that. Like, don't do that. Don't get into this. And he gave me his reasons. And then my second year out of school, I missed. I didn't play. I got a really, really bad illness that kind of knocked me on my butt. And so I was not able to play that year. And then my last year, I played in France for a little bit. I came back, went back to the CBA in Grand Rapids. And Doc, I think it was around January that I got cut. And so I'm back. I told my agent, find me another job. I want to keep playing. But then I started going to my dad's practices at Old Dominion. And I had no desire to work out basketball, work out anymore. And as I was around his practices, I loved them. And then I started doing stuff with the guys on the side, like working them out and things like that. And I just got such joy after seeing them get better, like seeing them like take some of the things that I was working with them with and things like that. And so that's when I got the bug. I would travel with my dad's team, you know, at Old Dominion. I would go to all the practices. I would go to the shoot arounds. And that's really when I got the bug, knowing that this is what I want to do.
You know, when we, you know, when you became our head coach at VCU, I'll never forget this as long as I live. You know, and I think this is such a tribute to you of what you were able to do at VCU. I'll never forget this. Your first game as a coach, you know, at VCU, I'm sure you remember, at Western Kentucky, and they had a really, really good team. I think they had made a big run in the NCAA tournament. They had a really good team. We go to Bowling Green, and we're winning the whole game. You guys are playing great. You got Nick George, a freshman, playing his first college game. You got Troy Godwin playing his first college game, JUCO transfer. You had three good guards with Dom and Emmanuel Mathis and Antoine Willie, but we're playing so good. And then right at the end, they make a couple lucky threes and get it into overtime and win. And I just, you know, I just felt so bad for you. That had to be one of the toughest games of your life.
It was tough. It was tough because obviously we knew how good they were, and they were on this run as a program where they had been to multiple, you know, NCAA tournaments in a row. And obviously they were really, really good at home. And to be able to go there and to neutralize the crowd from the majority of the game, you know, and things like that, and to, you know, lose that game, it was tough. But it also showed, and especially, you know, to be honest with you, for me, I think it gave our guys even more respect for me and for us as a coaching staff of the things that we had been working on, like this can work. Now, it was interesting because the next game we come home and I think it was Wagner kicked our butt. You know, at the Siegel Center. And I'm sure there were a lot of questions after that one. And you know, your boy Derek Wittenberg is screaming down to me at the other end, talking trash. I'll never forget that.
Oh, either. Yeah, I remember him. Yeah. Wit. Oh, Wit.
Yeah, oh, Wit. And then, you know, my first win, I'll never forget that. We played, I think it was North Carolina A&T. It was the next game. And I go in to do the last part of the pregame speech. And the guys go out, and I'm just kind of standing in there, me and my ops guy, and then we go to leave, and the door won't open. The door was locked and so people are trying, and they had to delay. So they had to go, the janitors, they had to go and get a sledgehammer and knock the door down. That was my first win.
I do remember that. Yeah, locked in the locker room.
Locked in the locker room.
Good old Siegel Center. You know? Yep. Good old Siegel Center. I had forgotten about that, but now that you mention it, that's right. Well, but you know, then that next year, you know, you had that team that, I mean, that was one of the great coaching jobs of all time at VCU, because, you know, you wind up playing two freshman guards, you know, who playing, you know, B.A. Walker at the point, he really wasn't a point guard. And then Jesse Pellerosa, walk on. I mean, and to win the conference, go to the NCAAs, play a hell of a game against Wake and lose by one, you know, with Chris Paul and, you know, Justin Gray and those guys. That was a terrific coaching job. What do you think about that? Because I know your point guard, Alexander Harper, went down with an ankle injury. And, you know, what were your thoughts about that time?
You know, to be honest with you, and it's interesting because I talk about that team a lot. I've talked about when I was at Oklahoma, I talked about that team. You know, when I was at Duke, I would talk about that team. And since I've been here at Pitt, I talk about that team. It's one of my it's maybe my favorite team that I've ever coached because of how it all came together. And I'll never forget, like our first team meeting that we had. I'll never forget this. Kanika and I had just gotten back from our honeymoon, and we flew back. And I remember on the plane coming back, I just started thinking about what I wanted to talk to this team about. And I remember that team meeting, I told them, like, I think we're going to be really good. I think we're the best team, and I think it's our time. And then, Doc, I think the reason why I felt that was Dominique. I think Dom was probably the best low maintenance player that I have ever coached. And those guys loved him. Like, everyone loved Dom, but his teammates loved him. And it was such the perfect combination of Dom, who was this really good guard, but was quiet, didn't really talk much, but led by example, but everyone loved him. And then you had Troy, who was this big, massive, mean, moody guy. And so he and Dom complemented each other. You saw the growth of Nick George from year 1 to year 2. And then, you mentioned, BA coming in and getting his feet wet early and then taking over the reins later. Jesse is probably one of the most unique guys that I've ever coached. The growth and maturation of Michael Doles, Derek Reed coming in and filling in. And so it was just that group was so together. And it's interesting. I was just telling the story the other day. I remember we were getting ready for Drexel. Like, I thought at the beginning we'd be really good, and as the season went on, I thought we were good. But we were getting ready to play Drexel. And I kicked them out of practice. It was like maybe a Monday. I kicked them out. I was pissed at them. I didn't think we were practicing hard. I didn't think we were doing things the right way. And then Tuesday's practice, I'm coming in, I'm walking in, and I hear, like, I can just, as I open the door, I can hear stuff going on the court. So I just kind of like peep around, and they are running practice. They're doing practice, and they were doing a shell drill that we had just kicked them out for the day before, that they were not handling it the right way. And so I went under the bleachers and I just stood there and watched them. And my other staff started coming out. I motioned for them because no one was out there. There were no coaches out there. And we're standing there watching them, and they're holding each other accountable. They're basically coaching each other right then. And I turned to my staff. I was like, we got them. We got them. Like, we're going to win this thing now. And then just to see it happen, and to, like you said, guys making plays and big, how together they were, how tough they were. You mentioned the Western Kentucky, we had a lead. We led George Mason for most of the game, during that finals of the CAA tournament, but then they were a really good team. They made some big time plays down the stretch. And Tony Skinn, who's a coach now, is an assistant, really, really good assistant coach, makes a 3 to tie it. And we don't call timeout. We get it in quick. Dom pushes it up, and he hits Pelarosa, and he gets fouled. And in that moment, there's probably no other guy in the world that I would rather have on the line than Jesse. And you're talking about a freshman, a walk-on who's from Richmond, who's playing in Richmond in the championship of the tournament to go to the NCAAs. And he went up there and went 1 for 2. But he made the basket to get us into the NCAA tournament. And when I think about Jesse, you think about his first start was at LaSalle that year, and he hit a game winner. That game at Drexel, he hit a game winner. And then to be in that position, he's one of the most unique guys and one of my favorite guys that I've ever coached. And it's interesting because I have several guys on that team that I still talk about, and I'll say, this is probably one of my favorite guys that I coach, and they all come from that team.
Yeah. Well, that was such a unique team, and, they just kind of came together, and it was just a special time. But clearly, you were instrumental in bringing those guys together, and they believed in you. They believed in one another. That was pretty neat. And then, clearly great, had great success at VCU and then go to Oklahoma. How big a transition was that for you?
It was huge.
Yeah.
Doc, it was huge. It was, I remember after the first week that I was there, after the first week that I had taken the job, I felt like I made a mistake. I really do. I really did at that time, I should say, because, I'll never forget, there was a kid there that we were recruiting. I'm not going to mention the name, but that, we were recruiting, and, we were doing it, and I was doing this stuff, and it was the first time in my life. He had signed there, you know, before I took the job. And when I took the job, he said he was staying, and then all of a sudden he wasn't staying. And it was the first time and only time in my life that I basically begged the kid to like give me a chance. And I'll never forget it. I remember after I get off the phone, my wife says to me, and she's emotional because she's seeing me do this, and she says to me, like, what are we doing? Like, we're leaving a place where those kids love you and they'll do anything for you for this, you know? And so it was a big transition going from, at the time, VCU was a really, really good mid-major. I don't think they're a mid-major anymore, but we were a really good mid-major. For me, Doc, I had really ever only lived or coached on the East Coast. And so now the first time I stepped foot in Oklahoma was for the press conference. I knew how big the state of Texas was going to be recruiting. I had never been to Tech. Our last year at VCU, we beat Houston at Houston. But it was very, very different, you know, going to a high major, understanding how different that is, the recruiting, the people that are involved, and things like that. And so it was very difficult at first. And then after a couple of months, things started to change because we got a commitment from Blake Griffin, and that kind of changed everything.
Yeah, I guess, you know, and then I guess, was it your second year or your third year there? You made to the Elite Eight?
Third, yeah.
Yeah. So
it happened. So, you know, it's interesting. And and it's been really interesting, especially here in this job at Pitt. When I think about it, like at VCU, we took over, and I was very lucky when I was there that I was there as an assistant for a year. So when I took over, I already knew what we needed to do, some of the things we needed to change, some of the guys we needed to get out of there, and things like that. Like, I understood the program. And in year two, we flipped it. You know, at Oklahoma, when I got there, I didn't really understand, like, again, the whole difference from high major, but I didn't know the guys either. And so the thing that I was, you know, that I learned pretty quickly there, I was left a program that had a culture, because I took over for Kelvin Sampson, who's one of the great coaches. And there was a culture of toughness, of defense, of rebounding, and physicality. What we had to do was that we had to improve the talent. We had to go out and improve the talent. But in year two, we flipped it. You know, year two, we're, you know, in the second round of the NCAA tournament, win 23 games, go from 16 to 23. And then, like we talked about in year three, you know, you win 30 games, you're in the Elite Eight, have the National Player of the Year, the first pick in the draft, the Big 12 Rookie of the Year. So you kind of think that it's going to, you know, you got it going in the right direction. And then everything fell apart after that year. And for me, my fourth year there was the first year. It was my 8th year as a head coach. It's the first time I ever had a losing season. And it was just like everything that could go wrong went wrong. And when I took this job, you know, again, I knew it was a rebuild. When I got here, I realized it's not a rebuild, it's a build. That those are two very different things. But again, there was this thing in my mind, because in year two at VCU, we flipped it. Year two at Oklahoma, we flipped it. So in my mind, that's what I'm thinking. And again, when you're taking over a build, it's very, very different. And also, during the 4 years we've been here, we've had a global pandemic that's changed everything in the world. And then the year after that, you have name, image, and likeness, and you have the one-time transfer rule go in effect. And so that essentially changed the landscape of college sports. And so it's been more difficult than I even anticipated. But you know, the jump to Oklahoma was very, very different.
Well, and you know, I was going to ask you about that, you know, the difference between coaching, you know, in 2002, you know, and 2022 has to be difference between daylight and darkness in some ways, you know, with name, image, likeness, transfer portal, you know, social media, you know, everybody's got an opinion about everything. I mean, how, and, you know, in today's world too, I mean, you know, I wanted to ask you a little bit about this. You know, I think, you know, when you were growing up and Jason was growing up, I mean, you were in a situation where, you know, if things didn't go your way, I'm sure your dad said, well, you know, suck it up. You know, it's up to you to make it better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
he used a little bit different language than that, but yeah.
I'm sure he did. But today it seems like, because kids can, as soon as something doesn't go their way, they can go transfer, or, they can go to a different high school or whatever, you know what I mean? And they've got so many people in their ear. How has that affected your ability to recruit, to engage with these guys?
Yeah, really interesting question. And you're spot on. It is night and day. It's interesting. When I was at Oklahoma, I can't remember what year it was. I think it was maybe my third or fourth year there. I remember I was riding home from school one day. Riding home from work, and I called my mom, and my mom was at home. She was an assistant principal at a high school, my old high school at the time. And I remember talking to her and just asking her how her day was or whatever. And she says to me, Jeffrey, these kids, like, they're just so different. And I said, I was like, why do you say that? You're right. These kids that I coach and recruit or whatever, they're very different, but you're just talking about the regular kid. Like, why do you say that? And Doc, she said something that I'll never forget. She said, when you guys were growing up, when you and Jason were growing up, you had not a fear of us, of, me and your father, but there was like this obviously respect, you love, but you care. She was like, like you are, I can't remember how old I was at the time. She was like, but like, you still don't curse around me. Like, you'll spell it out. Like, you'll, whatever. And she was just like, she said, I think the biggest difference are the parents. She said the parents now want to be their kid's friend instead of parenting them. She was like, you guys are friends with us now because we're all adults, but there's still a level of respect. But she just said, like, the respect level is different. The parents are very different. Like, if we did something when I was younger in school, when I got home, I was going to get in trouble. Yeah. She was like, like she was in charge of in-school suspension or sending kids home. And she talked about the parents made excuses for them. And so that's what I've seen, like what I think is the biggest. Look, I'm all for kids' rights to be able to transfer and things like that. But I do think it's something, look, if you are being abused by a coach, obviously physically, but also verbally, that's a very different thing. But I do think there's something about having to figure it out. Yeah. Having to go through some difficult times, some tough things, and be able to figure it out. Like, for me, I can tell you, if I didn't go through the things that I went through in my 4 years at Duke, my 4 years at Duke were hard. It wasn't the fairy tale experience like some guys have that, have played at Duke. We played for a national championship my freshman year. My sophomore year was maybe the worst team ever at Duke. We had to figure out how to climb out of that. I went through adversity. As a senior, I got booed in Cameron. As a player, it was one of the most difficult and most hurtful things that I've ever experienced in my life. But it prepared me for the real world. And so whether I got booed at Oklahoma as the coach, whether I get booed here at Pitt, I had to deal with that at 20, 21 years old. I had to deal with that, under that microscope. And it wasn't social media. It wasn't, right, talk radio or whatever back then, but I still had to deal with that. I had to learn how to deal with it. And so I think that's the part that I think that's just very, very different. The involvement of the parent. Certainly social media has changed everything. It's changed our world. It's changed our country. It's changed everything. And so I think the job of a coach now is more difficult than it was certainly when I first started. But Doc, even like 5, 10 years ago, it's very, very different now. The relationships are harder. It's hard to have, especially as you're trying to build a program, because like you said, not a lot of people want the truth, and so sometimes as a coach, do you walk around on eggshells because if you tell them the truth, they can leave. And so it's those things are just, it's made what we do a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, and I think, it's such a shame because you learn so many lessons like you did, fighting through adversity, and that's where you really gain that, that mental toughness, that ability to cope with different things, the resiliency to bounce back. And I mean, you clearly have that as a player, as a coach, that sort of thing. And I know, after Oklahoma, you went to Duke, and, that had to be kind of an interesting change to go from Oklahoma back to Duke and work with Coach K and recruit all those players. So, I mean, how do you see that time? How many years were you at Duke? 5 years?
Seven.
Yeah.
Yep. I thought that was probably the most important time in my growth as a person, as a coach, everything. You don't realize as you're going through something, probably one of my biggest fears when I became the head coach at VCU, when you hired me, was, look, I try not to pay attention, but I heard the noise. I knew everything everyone was saying. I didn't deserve the job. I hadn't earned it. I hadn't paid my dues. I had a silver spoon. What is VCU doing? This is a joke, and things like that. And I think what that did was that it motivated me, but it also put a fear in me of like, you know what? I can't let these people be right. So we have to win. We have to do this. We have to, whatever. And so at 27, I'm the coach there. At 31, I'm the coach at a high major place. I heard the same things. I heard the exact, and so for me, I think, Doc, there was this huge fear of being fired, because in my mind, it was like, if I get fired, then all these people that have said these things are right. And when I got fired, I remember when it happened, when I got fired, I was embarrassed, I was hurt. It's like a part of you dies. I remember I woke up the next day. We left the next day and went back to North Carolina just to visit family. I'm walking through the airport. I see people would read the newspaper. The front page is a big picture of me. But then I realized, man, besides my family, no one cares. You know what I mean? Like, the sun came up the next day, the world kept moving and things like that. And I had 2 daughters at the time, 4 and 2. So nothing mattered. Like, you just move on. I was getting ready to take a job with ESPN, and then coach called and was like, I need you to come back. And so I did that. I learned so much there. I learned, how to run a program, not just coach, but how to run a program. I was able to see it from that side. I think I became a better coach from being around, obviously, Coach K, but Wojo, Chris Collins, all the infrastructure that Coach had, the people that he had around him, how smart they were, how involved they were. Coach had evolved so much from the coach that I played for. And again, I hadn't been back at Duke since '97, since I had graduated. I'd never worked there prior to that. So to see how he evolved, to see how much more responsibility the assistant coaches had than the assistants had when I played there. And so just to see that, I think I learned so much. It was a huge part of my growth, because everything happened so fast for me. Like, my career was just so abnormal. Like you mentioned, when you walked down there and said, I want to talk to you, and I'm conducting that study hall, that set off these chains of events that just were abnormal, especially during that time. It's interesting, Doc, and I've never really, I've thought about this, but I've never really done the research. But I would be curious back then, like, how often did that happen? Like, I felt like you set like this standard, and I felt like after me, that's when you started seeing, like, these young assistants that didn't have much experience getting opportunities, whether it was a Brad, Steve, or whoever it was. You just started to see it, a little bit more after that. But my time at Duke was great. I got to be around Coach in a different way. That relationship, evolved from player coach to a true friendship. I got to be back with 2 of my best friends, with Chris Collins and Steve Wojciechowski. We got to be with our family. My wife is from Raleigh. She went to Duke. My family was down in Fayetteville, so it was an hour, 15 minutes away. So for me personally, for my psyche, for my mental health, it was so good being back there. At that time, Doc, what I needed to be surrounded by love, because of what we had gone through and what I'd gone through my last 2 years at Oklahoma. And so Duke, being able to go back there was a godsend for me.
I don't know if this question's appropriate or not. So you had to enjoy that. So now I'm sure you had other opportunities, because, you guys were so successful. You probably were the #1 recruiter in the country, the guys you were bringing into Duke, at that point. So why did you take the Pitt job?
I've been there for 7 years. Certainly I wanted to be a head coach again. I did have other opportunities in different years. 2015 was the first one. because of how things ended in Oklahoma with the cloud of NCAA stuff, you know, there was a part of me that wondered, would I ever get a shot again? You know, because of, we lost 2 years in a row, you know, there was a cloud of uncertainty with NCAA stuff. And so in 2015, when I was offered a job then, it was like, I was so grateful and appreciative that someone actually wanted me. But for me at the time, you know, it was very different from when I left VCU to go to Oklahoma. Now I had kids involved. So it wasn't just me and my wife, it was 3 babies now, you know, my 2 girls and then my son. And so I had said then that, you know, the thing that I'm going to do, it has to be right for my family. And one of the mistakes I made, Doc, was that when I interviewed for Oklahoma, I never took Kanika with me, my wife. I never took her to any of the interview stuff with me. And I said to myself, like, I'll never make that mistake again. She's going to be involved in all of this because I actually want her opinion. I think she's really good at reading people. And so when the, you know, like the Pitt job, how it came about was crazy. And, you know, they contacted me on a Thursday. We were at the NCAA tournament site. We were in Nebraska, and we were getting ready for the Sweet 16. And I spoke to the AD Thursday night, told her I was interested, did all of that stuff. But then I said to her, look, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Like I owe it to Duke and the players and, you know, everything to be locked in with them. Now I have an agent. If you want to talk to him, you can talk to him, but I'm locked in here. I did every scout. And so I want to give my full undivided attention. Like they wanted to fly to Nebraska to meet with me. I'm like, I don't want to do any of that. And so we got beat Sunday to go to the Final Four. And then they flew down Monday to interview us. They flew to Durham. And Kanika and I met with them. When we left to get in the car, you know, to drive home, Kanika asked me, what do you think? And I said, you know, I think I'm gonna do it. You know, I think this is the one. And she agreed. When we got home and later that night, like I wrestled with the decision. I really did. And the thing that I wrestled, it wasn't like, you know, do I think I can do it or anything like that? My biggest thing was like, am I gonna have the energy? Because this was in April. We had buried my father in November. And that took a lot out of me. And as you know, like these seasons are long. There was a part of me that was ready for the season to be over with once we lost, just to get a break, mentally, physically, emotionally, because of all these, you know, suppressed feelings and things that I had with the death of my father. So that's what I wrestled with. Like, am I going to have the energy to do this? But for me, Doc, what it did was that it gave me an opportunity to coach in the ACC. When I got into this, maybe because I never thought that I would be a coach, so I never had like this dream job. Mm-hmm. I would talk to Chris Collins when I worked there. He always had a dream job. I won't say what it is, but he had a dream job. Some other coaches like, I never had that. For me, I wanted to coach in the ACC. I played in the ACC. I grew up in North Carolina, in the heart of ACC. And so for me, this was it. And Pitt, I just felt like I knew how good they had been before. I liked the fact that they were down a little bit. I say liked past tense. Now that I'm here, I'm not sure how much I liked it, how smart that was. But I just felt like it had everything. You know, it's a really cool city. It was a really good university academically. Again, I knew how good they were. And I just felt like the ACC, I understand the ACC, that we'll be able to get this thing back, you know, to a national level of relevance as they were from 2002 till about 2012, 13.
You know, I think we all evolve. Like right now, you know, my passion, I think we've talked about Finnegan's Challenge, trying to help families, kids born with birth defects or have some other serious issue and help families navigate that. So that's my passion. We all evolve. What would you say, you know, from that day on 2002 to where you are today? How have you evolved kind of both as a person and as a coach?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that I'm comfortable with me. That's the biggest thing. You know, I'm not trying to be anyone that anyone else wants me to be. Like, I'm very comfortable with who I am. I've been through a lot in this profession, personally, with health. I've had a lot of success. I've had a lot of lows. I've had downs. I've had failures. I've had all of those things. And throughout it all, I've continued to get up. I'm still standing. You know, I've learned the value of the people around you. Those are the people that really matter. And you know, the family, how important that is. So just all of those things. I just think I've grown to be more comfortable with who I am than that. You know, at the time when you came and talked to me, I was 26. When I got the job, I was 27.
Is that right?
We announced it. And so I just feel like I've grown. I've learned so much about me, about life, about the things that are important. I've learned the importance of surrounding yourself with really good people, having people that believe in you. Like for you, you believed in me when I wasn't really sure what the hell I was doing. There was something that you saw, you know, and other people may try to take credit for it, but you saw it, you believed in it, you poured that into me. And that helped me. And it's amazing what can happen. It really, Coach used to talk about this. Coach K used to talk about it. It's amazing what can happen when you have someone that believes in you. And that person gives you confidence and makes you believe and see things in you that you may not see or understand yet. And that's what you did me. I'm not where I am right now if it wasn't for you. And so I'm grateful for that, and just, you know, just very comfortable with who I am right now.
Well, you know, like I say, you kind of, you know, we had success at VCU, some, you know, Sonny and Mac, but I mean, you kind of were the guy that really got that thing going in the trajectory that it's going. So I think all the VCU people should, you know, certainly pay tribute to you. We didn't have all the resources they got now.
No,
You know
no,
I mean? They were
no
tough.
question, man.
I mean, Tronny was tough, charging any more student fee. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Hey man, I went there. When I was at Duke. Was it Duke or was it? No, it was here. We were recruiting a kid from Richmond. So I went back there to see him at his school, and I just drove by there. I drove by VCU. Man, I saw that practice facility from the outside. I've seen the pictures. I was just like, holy smokes, man. Like we were going over to the parking garage to lift weights.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Franklin Street Gym at times practice.
Exactly.
I've been in that new practice facility. It is as good as anywhere. You know,
yeah, man. And so we, you know, I'm sure they don't have to get kicked off the court for robotics anymore. Or...
yeah, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, it's a little bit different, but you were a big part of that. But so one thing I'm going to ask everybody, you know, 24 hours, you know, 24 hours prior to a game, what does your 24 hours look like?
Well, 24 hours prior probably is the time where I probably relax the most, because I feel like we've gotten everything in. It's the final preparation. You know, the thing that I'm trying to do now is just to, you know, I'm constantly questioning, okay, did we go over this? Did we cover this? I still watch tape to try to see if there's something that, you know, maybe we missed or maybe a tweak. I know within that 24 hours, the next day, we're going to get up, we're going to have shoot around at some point. So what do we have to do there? Trying to figure out the mental state of, you know, of our team, of each guy. Is there something maybe that I should say to one guy, or something that we can do? What can we do to motivate, and things like that. So it's probably, you know, the night before is probably, to be honest with you, for me, is the night that I probably sleep the best, because everything leading up to it, I'm a nervous wreck and things like that. The part that I hate is like the hour and a half, 2 hours before the game, when you're just sitting back, and as a head coach, you're sitting back in a room, usually by yourself, and it's just trying to pass time, and different guys do different things. I try to do stuff to keep my mind off the game. So I'll read a book, I'll listen to a podcast, I'll turn some music on. If I'm, you know, somewhere, I'll have TV on, watching something. Could be a game, it could be a show that I like, but just trying to do stuff, you know, up until about 45 minutes before the game. And then, you know, I'll usually talk to our team around the 36-minute mark, and then talk to them again at 10 and things like that. But it's right before the game, that hour and a half, 2 hours, that's probably when I'm most nervous.
Yeah, it's funny because, when I was coaching and then, as an athletic director, the one thing that I always wanted them to do is play the national anthem really fast. I hated
Yeah.
those long national anthems.
Oh my gosh. No question.
It
Yes.
seems like it takes forever, because you're
Yeah.
so anxious and
Yep.
nervous and that sort of thing. So, okay, of all the ACC places you go, what's your favorite restaurant in the ACC when you're
Favorite restaurant in the ACC? It is, what is my favorite restaurant? Dame's Chicken and Waffles in Durham. Probably because I know it so well. But Dame's Chicken and Waffles. Every time we go, we were in Chapel Hill or we're at Duke, I go to Dame's Chicken and Waffles by myself. I haven't taken my team there, but I go there every time.
That's great. That is great. If you had one thing you wanted to tell young coaches, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to really, really trust themselves, to surround yourself with really good people and people that are going to compliment you, that are going to help you be at your best, that are going to push you, that are going to tell you the truth, but people that help you be better. So believe in yourself, but make sure that the people around you are the right people. I think there's so many outstanding coaches, but I think the main thing, especially as a head coach, you got to have the right people around you if you want to be successful. If you have any chance of being successful.
Yeah, no question. Well, hey, I appreciate you taking your time out. I know you're busy. You got players on campus yet?
We do. We've been in summer school now. I think this is week 4. This is week 3 of workouts. So we have some guys here. We don't have our whole team yet, but we got some guys here. We've been recruiting. It's crazy, Doc. You're busier in the off season. There's no off season anymore.
Right.
You're busier now in the off season than you are during the season. And so we had to try to retool our roster. We lost a lot from transfers and things like that. But I love where we are right now. I love the guys that we have, and our staff has done an outstanding job. And so we're just trying to get better each day.
Yep. That's what it takes. And I'm sure you will. But Jeff, appreciate you taking time to do this. We go back a long way, had a lot of good times together, enjoyed a lot of good things. And, like I say, when we kind of came together, a lot of people thought we were both crazy.
Nuts.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
No question. I guess the joke's on them.
It is, no question. I agree wholeheartedly. So thanks so much. And
all right, Doc.
These podcasts, and maybe sometime later I'll get you back on. Okay.
Sounds good. Anytime.
Appreciate you so much.
Okay.